Hey everyone, I'm Natasha Martinez. With the 2020 presidential election a couple of weeks away, we're here to discuss the power of voting and how your vote will directly impact your money. Today, I'm joined by an incredible group of panelists who know a whole lot more about this than me. We have co-host of Crooked Media's What a Day podcast, Gideon Resnick, policy advocate and political strategist Heather McGhee, candidate for the 36th Council District in Brooklyn, Chi Ossé, and finally, we have Democratic nominee for New York's 16th Congressional District in the 2020 election, Jamaal Bowman. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll just jump in right away. Trump loves to say that he has created the greatest economy in American history. So the economy, U.S. economy under Trump, is it actually the greatest in American history?
Hell no, absolutely not, especially not in my district. I mean, we're talking Yonkers, Mount Vernon, parts of New Rochelle, and the Northeast Bronx. And our district has been suffering economically prior to the pandemic. And right now, people are in debilitating situations.
Not only is Trump's economy not as great as he claims it is, but the future of the American economy will crumble under a Trump presidency and what he's doing to our environment. Trump's ignorance to climate change is going to inevitably crumble not only our economy, but our lifestyle as it is, especially for Black and brown people.
I'm so glad she mentioned that because we often pit the economy and the environment against each other, like it's going to cost too much to do what we need to do to save life as we know it on the planet. But climate change is already costing us $240 billion a year in economic costs, from the wildfires to extreme heat to the erosion of our infrastructure. That's why we need a Green New Deal, and that's absolutely one of the clearest distinctions you can make on the ballot between Democrats and Republicans is that Republicans have been taken over by climate deniers who, want to keep subsidizing polluting fossil fuel companies and lobbyists, and the Democrats who want to fundamentally change the way we use energy and address the biggest existential threat that we are all facing today.
The stock market doesn't measure the fact that, the planet only has a certain finite amount of time left to be habitable for human beings. And apparently the stock market is, the sole metric by which Republicans grade the strength of the economy, even in a year where we've had historic layoffs and an economy that is not coming back because there's no effort to actually help the people who desperately need it most, during one of the worst recessions that we've seen.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit about layoffs and the job market a little bit later in the panel, but I do want to ask about taxes being taken out of paychecks. It's too high and the returns are too low. So why do tax cuts and breaks only seem to benefit the rich?
I mean, it's corruption, plain and simple. We have a tax code that's been rigged by lobbyists for the very rich and the most profitable corporations, and the Republicans and Donald Trump made it about 3 times as bad with their huge tax giveaway to corporations and the very rich. I mean, we had a blockbuster New York Times revelation. The tax returns that Donald Trump had been hiding year after year finally leaked, and it turns out that he was paying $750 for the first 2 years that he was president of the United States. Let's just pause on that for a minute.
Yeah.
So school janitors, nurses, fast food workers, garbage collectors, doctors, lawyers, people who are unemployed often pay more income tax than that. Taxes are the rent that we pay to be a part of a decent society. They help build our infrastructure. They helped create the greatest middle class the world ever saw in the middle of the 20th century. And we are going to need to ask the very wealthy corporations, to pay more to fund America's promise. And for people who spend all of their time and resources trying to avoid taxes, what ends up happening is that tax burden trickles down to the rest of us. And that's why you see people who work all day still paying more in taxes than millionaires and billionaires. It's got to stop, and that's another huge reason why people should be voting to see that big difference between Democrats and Republicans, because Democrats want to increase taxes on the wealthy, and Republicans are just addicted to cutting them.
And Jamaal, you talked about in your own community and the struggles that they have there. What are your thoughts when you hear something like that, or that the president is just paying so little when there are so many people struggling right now?
he's manipulating a rigged system in his favor, so he only pays $750 a year in taxes. I mean, we have to understand, we have a system where the 400 wealthiest Americans pay less in terms of a tax rate than the secretaries who work for them. We have a system where large corporations like Amazon pay $0. I repeat, $0 in taxes while hiding billions of dollars in offshore accounts. We have an economy where over 210,000 people are dead from the coronavirus, and Jeff Bezos is now the only 200 billionaire in our country. It's a rigged system where the wealthy elite have taken control of our political arena, and they've had control over the last 50 years. Real wages have been stagnant, labor unions are under attack, and Wall Street continues to carry all of the power in our political and economic system. So it's a rigged system, and the system needs to change through reforming the tax code, through breaking up monopolies and enforcing the antitrust laws that are on the books, and through more government investment in communities that have been historically ignored. So Trump hasn't even broken the law, based on the way the system is currently working.
And how do we encourage voters who maybe hear like the system is rigged and they don't think that they can create a change in that?
I think it needs to be exhibited on a local level. As someone that is running in a local election, I'm doing this because I'm tired of not being heard on a national level. The election, or the general election of Trump and Biden, is to me a lot of noise. We can't complain about what's happening on a national level when we don't have our ducks in a row in our own backyard. If we set a precedent for what progressive politics can look like on a local level, then we can see real change happen, and maybe we won't see politics or we won't see policy as something that is completely rigged. If we can change what's happening in our neighborhoods and elect people that actually represent our values and our ideals, then we can actually see change right in front of our eyes, rather than believing the entire system is rigged.
Yeah, and I think that people to that point have had the opportunity to start, electing new members, electing local candidates to office, and actually see that, if they do put the work in and they have candidates who speak to them and represent them, then it doesn't have to be the way that it always was before. And slowly but surely, when you add to those ranks, those individuals are going to be crucially important going forward under a potential Democratic administration. They're going to be working in tandem with a Biden administration, and potentially also at times butting heads with them, which is probably a good thing to happen for progressive change to occur, right? So I think it's sort of a building blocks that people have to put in place in order to start to knock that sort of entire system down, or knock that nihilistic view of things down.
The reason the system is rigged is because about half of Americans don't vote, right? I mean, it's very clear that by suppressing the vote, by narrowing our choices, by letting the people who have the most money, call the shots in terms of the campaign ads, in terms of what proposals are put forward, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So the system is rigged partly because it doesn't have our voices in it, because it's not representative of American people, and that people who are struggling the most economically are those whom folks in Washington can count on not voting.
That's such an excellent point. So 94 million people did not vote in the last general election. And that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump became president. 4.4 million African Americans who voted in 2012 did not vote in 2016. So that's a key point in this discussion. And you have to vote for new, dynamic, progressive candidates.
We have a man on the street question coming to you guys.
Hey guys, my name is Angel and I go to SUNY Newport. Now my question for you guys is, can my vote affect policies on student loans?
Student loans. Chi, I know you started going to Chapman. I am also a Chapman alum. That's an expensive ass school, okay? So I don't know if you're dealing with the student loans still, but I think that a lot of people are dealing with student loans. Even up into adulthood. It's expensive.
Especially in this race, I think a huge conversation was student loan forgiveness. And I'm so happy that the left of the left pushed that conversation into the Democratic view. Joe Biden on his platform is promising in policy that people that make under $125,000 a year that go to 2 to 4 year universities will gain student loan forgiveness. Trump does not have a plan for that.
Talking about things that matter, right? Making it more personal to the people that are caring to vote about these things. How do we redirect funds to the things that actually matter to us?
If you have people that are beginning in the streets and sort of making demands of their elected officials in terms of where and how they want funds to be allocated, it forces elected officials into positions where they have to listen and they have to start to think through how that works. Because the only way that you sort of show priorities in terms of how you dictate policy has to do a lot of the time with where you put your money. And, you know, we know it's a fact in American cities throughout the country that on an issue like police funding, that every single budget is largely bloated for those departments in comparison to the kind of money that goes into the other, you know, societal needs that people desperately want and need in their communities.
So there's a reallocation of resources that needs to happen from law enforcement and the military towards areas that truly keep people safe. And this is all about reimagining public safety, right? Because our local police forces, they only deal with about 5% violent crime. It's heartbreaking to hear stories about police being called for a mental health issue, someone struggling in mental distress, and that person ends up dead. Why? Because we don't have the infrastructure in place to get that person the mental health supports that they need so they don't end up dead and they end up nurtured back to health, God willing. In addition, Congress has the power to authorize spending, and the budget doesn't have to be balanced in the same way that the state and or the city budget does. So if Congress authorizes spending in a particular area, say housing, for example, and housing is huge because it's part of a holistic health conversation. So if Congress authorizes spending for housing, then that spending needs to be allocated towards housing. If Congress authorizes spending for education, the money goes there. Food security, the money goes there. Jobs, the money goes there. And this is a 50, 60-year problem. When our communities have needed jobs, they brought us police instead of jobs because the crime is going up because there were no jobs there. We need jobs, we need job training programs, and we need to nurture the development of people as opposed to continuing to just invest in more policing in our communities.
I jumped into this race because of the militarization of the NYPD. I was someone that was protesting every day in the streets of New York City and was seeing an aggressive amount of force exhibited by the NYPD. As someone that is running for office now and someone that's running for office in a neighborhood where there is gun violence and older Black people want police to be in the neighborhood, I have to explain to them that we don't have access to properly funded public education. We don't have access to properly funded public housing, infrastructure, healthcare. And there is enough money in New York City. New York City has the largest budget in the entire country. That money is being allocated to the wrong agencies. I don't see there to be a use for the police to have riot gear, armored vehicles, rail guns, machine guns, when teachers have to pay for their own school supplies at the beginning of the school year in many public schools here in the city. Language is just important. I'm trying to reframe that dialogue of defund and turn it into something of more of a reimagination.
I mean, I think this is one of those places where it's so important for us to think about not just the top of the ticket, right? It's always the president and the vice president who take up all of the attention, all of the oxygen. Nobody is usually running ads that most people can see about your congressperson, about your state legislature, whether it's for the assembly or the Senate. These are the people who actually constitutionally, it's their job to write the spending laws, to allocate the money. And so often people don't get enough of a relationship with those legislators, with the people in Congress who represent them, with the people in their state house who represent them, with the people in their state council who represent them, and that's where the dollars get decided. And so it's so important for people to vote, down the line, for people to get information about who it is. If you just want to vote down a party line, that's better than not voting at all. And there are organizations that do endorsements, like here in New York, where we're sitting, the New York Working Families Party has a ballot line, so you can vote for Democrats on the New York Working Families Party line, which says, you know what, not only is this a Democrat, but this is a Democrat who stands up for working families, who's part of the progressive squad, who is going to fight to make the party more representative of working class people of all races.
But the cost of living is obviously very high and minimum wage is still at a low. So how can we bridge the gap, in your opinion?
This is such an important question. This is actually one of those places where I think Donald Trump takes a lot of credit for things that grassroots advocates have won, right? There have been some gains in the economy where wages at the bottom, after being low and stagnant and declining for 2 generations, have been started to go up. But it's not because Donald Trump did anything. Donald Trump doesn't want to raise the minimum wage. Donald Trump gutted the Department of Labor that could make it, and a lot of the Obama-era Department of Labor reforms that make it easier for working class people to collect overtime pay, for example, time and a half. But instead, fast food workers and home health care aides and people working at retail stores across the country risked everything to put pressure on their employers and on states and cities to say, we want a living wage. We want $15 in the union. And that happened all throughout the past 5 years. And you started to see a whole bunch of people, getting, wage increases. The only way to really make it the law of the land that you have to have a living wage, that nobody can work, whether they're an independent contractor, a gig worker working for Instacart or Uber or whatever, is to have federal reform on labor laws. And fortunately, the Democrats have really gotten their act together on this House. Now, the most important thing, in addition to raising the minimum wage and having labor law reform, is that we need more unions. We need more collective bargaining. That is the only way that working people have ever gotten a decent slice of the pie that they spend all day baking, whether it's in the United States or all over the world.
Yeah, I would just add, and the best way to get there is by voting for Joe Biden and vote Donald Trump out of the White House, and voting for Democrats in the Senate and flipping the Senate. This is a key point as well. We need Democrats to take control of the White House, the Senate, and maintain control of the House. Now, that doesn't guarantee anything, but it puts us in a better position to organize and mobilize and put pressure on Democrats elected to Congress so that they can move further to the left on this issue. I mean, federal minimum wage of $7.25 in 2020, it's insane. It's plantation capitalism. It's economic enslavement. And that has to be raised. It should be, if over the last 30, 40 years, it would have continued to rise with the gross domestic product, the minimum wage would be $25 an hour. That's what it should be right now. And it's only $7.25. So we're fighting for a $15 federal minimum wage. We're also fighting for a federal jobs guarantee. And that's where the Green New Deal comes in. Dealing with environmental injustice, dealing with the economic depression that we're dealing with the racial injustice that's taking place. Let's get people back to work through a federal jobs guarantee. If you're ready, willing, and able to work, let's pass the policy, get people to work, invest where we need to invest, retrofit schools, build new infrastructure, grow the care economy. A lot of work to be done, and we need Democrats to be in control, to put pressure on us, so that we can do the right thing.
And, on the job market discussion, we do have a man on the street video talking about just that.
So with the pandemic going on, the job market has been a lot more narrow. And for me, I'm graduating this spring. So this is a big concern for me because I'm not sure if I'm going to have a job to go into when I graduate. So I guess one of my questions would be, is how would this election affect the job market, and what are they going to do to create new opportunities for people?
What we've seen so far this year in terms of even just dealing with the economic fallout of the public health crisis is that you have Democrats in the House that passed legislation to keep funding going for things like testing, keeping the opportunity to keep people economically afloat when they are looking for jobs, and that just being blocked by the Republican Senate and the Republican White House by default. So if you do have a situation where you have control over those three branches going into next year, one of the first immediate things in terms of the economy, which maybe you're still looking for jobs when you enter the job market initially, is that at least you're not going to be in a situation where you can't afford to buy food, you can't afford to have the essentials that you need, because at the very least, Congress can authorize sending additional checks to people. They can authorize $600 additional federal unemployment that was keeping people afloat for a long time and actually reducing poverty at certain stages of early on in the pandemic. So those are just the immediate things, even before you get into the opportunity of things like Green New Deal, which would offer this broader employment opportunity for people.
Also, just a little emphasis, especially on the Green New Deal, and when it comes to green jobs being created in this country, it needs to be accessible for all Americans, not just white Americans. Black and brown people need to be included in that dialogue, especially when it comes to tackling the climate crisis and jobs that will be created with green SYEP farm programs or anything of that sort.
One of the best parts for me of Joe Biden's Build Back Better economic plan is the emphasis on caregiving. So often when presidents who have all been men stand up there and want to be a part of a ribbon cutting or something, it's about building a new bridge, or it's about, although I wish we'd had more of that recently since we've just stopped doing infrastructure investments. But it's always thinking about hard infrastructure, right? And so when you picture that, that's a majority male-dominated industry. But the real infrastructure that keeps our country going is the care infrastructure. And of course, we've seen that so much during this crisis, where everything that's not completely essential has been stripped away. And what have we relied on? The underpaid and often unpaid work, often of women of color, immigrant women, teaching our children, caring for our children, taking care of our seniors, just doing all of the work that makes all other work possible.
As a former educator, this is obviously something I'm very passionate about. And I was super excited to see Vice President Biden's focus on early childhood education and universal child care. I mean, this is so critical. If we can provide nurturing environments to our babies, and I mean birth to age 3 specifically, the first 1,000 days of their lives, if we could provide nurturing environments, their brain develops accordingly, and they are more ready for pre-K and kindergarten and to thrive when they get to our schools. And it allows our families to go back to work and do what they love doing and do what they want to do. So it's great to see Joe Biden focus there and understand when we grow the care economy, this is also part of a Green New Deal as well, because these are net zero carbon jobs. So it's early childhood education, it's nurses, it's teachers, and it's long-term care providers to our seniors as well.
What do you guys say to people who think that not voting is better than voting for people whose policies maybe don't reflect their values?
I understand is the first thing I would say. Before Barack Obama, at that level, at the national presidential level, it was all white men running for office. And whether they were Republican or Democrat, they were not speaking to the issues that were going on in my home, in my community, or in my city, quite frankly. So I understand and I get it. And I was there at a point in my life. But I think what we see happening now is a shift in our electoral politics at a congressional level and at a local level. So when you see Bernie Sanders in 2016 talking about economic inequality, when you see the election of the squad in 2018, 4 women of color fighting against white supremacy from the inside out, it's incredible. And now in 2020, you see people like myself, Cori Bush, Mondaire Jones, and many others running for office and winning. And here in New York City at the local level, so many progressives, working class folk, people who come from communities that have been historically ignored, they're running and they're winning. So there's a change happening. And that change will continue to happen if the 94 million that stayed home last time come out, but also remain engaged on a day-to-day basis, because it's not just about Congress. It's about the state, it's about the county, it's about the city, it's about your local school board. Democracy is a contact sport, and we need people to participate every single day in order to demand the change that we require in our neighborhoods.
I mean, as someone that has been protesting all summer, there is this dialogue of individuals that are out on the street that are claiming that they're not going to vote in November. And, you know, that obviously frustrates me. And what I tell them, or what I am trying to advocate for my generation, is that if you are passionate about Black Lives Matter, passionate about trans lives, the environment, women's reproductive rights, our fight doesn't end on November 3rd. We need to continue pushing and continuing our movement after that voting date. We need to hold our local elected officials and elected officials in general accountable for their claims and their statements. The movement continues on after our voting day, and we have to continue moving and advocating and standing up and speaking up for what we believe in if we're doing it before the actual voting day.
What do you guys think is missing from the voter experience that can really push people to investigate, learn, and then ultimately place their vote?
I mean, why is it so complicated? This country has been what is it, over 400 years old or something, like 300 years? And I don't know. And we still don't have it together yet? I mean, we hear of people getting the wrong absentee ballots. We hear of people having trouble registering to vote. Why is it like this? Obviously, I know the answer. It's voter suppression. But come on, can we have more? Can we have a better Board of Elections? Can we have more control over this voting or getting registered process? And the actual voting day is still so complicated as well. I wish it was just easier.
At the same time, there's no better feeling than going to the ballot box and seeing all these other people and recognizing that you're doing something that, you know, for me, my ancestors fought for millions, billions of people around the world. They would love to have the opportunity to do, and one of the things that is very much on the ballot this year is the future of our democracy itself. And so, the Democrats have said that their first bill again next year is going to be a major expansion of democracy, whether it's, making sure that the kinds of voter suppression that we've seen since President Obama's election are illegal and, as a matter of federal law, where we have election day registration or in fact automatic voter registration. The government knows where I am. I pay my taxes here. We're registered for schools here. They know where I am. Why should I have to pre-register at all before just going to vote? So those kinds of reforms are absolutely on the ballot this year. And so I think that we can see the kind of multiracial democracy that makes it not only, easier for people to vote, but more compelling and possible for people to vote. And it's the choices we make today, even within this system that is stacked against us, that is going to push it forward.
Yeah, it's the ease, right? I think everybody else sort of said the fact that it's not such a simple process to just get up the morning of Election Day and say, I'm ready to vote right now. I'm going to go do it. Like, you have to go through all of these steps before. And the fact that there are all of those hoops is part and parcel of the cycle that I think that Heather was talking about before, which is that they want to lower the participation of everyone because they are afraid of making it easier for everyone to do this. And so I think, it's about taking that first step and engaging in the trust with the people that you vote for to actually make the kinds of changes that would make it easier in the future.
Election day should be a national holiday, like it just should be. And that would give people the time and the space to vote. I'm happy to see that, early voting is happening in states across the country. That's awesome. Keep that going. But also make Election day a holiday. Make voter registration automatic for those who turn 18. That's a big deal and something that needs to be done as well. And then the other piece is, elected officials, they haven't done their job, and they have strategically done the opposite of their job by suppressing the vote. It's their job, in my opinion, to include their entire district in our democracy. And that's something that we're working very hard on here in this district, not just for the election, but going forward. And the organizing within our states needs to continue to grow and be very strong to pull people into the process. If Democrats had control of the Senate, we would have had $2,000 per month checks going to people throughout the duration of the coronavirus. We would have had $600 per week continuing, and we would have had the money needed for our public schools to retrofit our schools and hire more teachers and really deal a lot better with this pandemic. So your vote matters, like not just here in New York, but across the country, because we get the right people in office, we pass the right policies, and literally you can save lives.
Thank you so much for joining me. You guys, get out and vote. Do it like your life depends on it, because it does. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Natasha Martinez. Thanks for watching.